Peace is not merely a distant goal that we seek. It is the means to which we arrive at that goal.
What's up, people?
Hello! Did you notice how I kept that in order so that it wouldn't do the thing where it's like, you're not even a sound?
I will say it did disappear in the middle for a second.
I worked so hard. I controlled it.
It did fade a little in the middle there. How ready are you?
I'm medium ready.
Hello, people of YouTube. If you've clicked on this video, it's because you want to see what the themes of Elbaph are going to be, or it's the future. You know what Elbaph's themes are, and you want to see how incredibly right we were way back in the past.
What if we're wrong?
What if we're wrong? We're right.
Oh, well, I love the confidence. I'm here for the confidence.
Right off the bat, at first, it isn't going to seem like a One Piece discussion. You're going to be like, whoa, where's the One Piece in this? And I promise you, this is 100% about One Piece, but we need to set the stage to help you understand why this is going to be the themes of the arc.
Can I hear a secret? I don't think they're controversial at all.
I think that these are going to sound like very, very, very controversial ideas. And I want to start with a very simple and very difficult concept. Peace is not good. What? Why are we laughing?
It's a very simple concept.
It's very simple. Peace is not good.
Oh my god. Oh my god.
What?
What if One Piece is actually a misspelling of what it is, and it's actually one P-E-A-C-E?
Okay, but we can't go off on that right now. That's something we haven't thought about yet that we've got to put aside.
What if it's both? And what we're talking about today is the connector of that.
I want to put this aside. We can bring it up later. A lot of people are saying things like they like when people cause problems or peace is boring, but that's not what I'm talking about when I say peace isn't good. It's that the idea that peace is a goal, peace is an objective, is not a good objective. This isn't about suffering builds character. This isn't about, I don't mean pacifism isn't good. No, I'm not saying because peace will go away. None of this is what I'm talking about. And I think this is immediately highlighting, though, that you guys are seeing there's a lot of angles you can go where peace starts to break down. One of the main pieces of reading I did in preparation for this by Gray Cox. Yes, his name is Gray Cox, written in 1986 by Gray Cox, called The Ways of Peace, a philosophy of peace as action. He talks a lot about the idea of there being lots of different ways people define peace. And I think what you guys are highlighting by having all these ways that peace is not good, that aren't even what we're talking about today, kind of highlights one of the problems with peace as a goal, which is peace has a bunch of definitions, and a lot of them are just like the absence of conflict or the absence of war. And something that is defined by only an absence as a goal, kind of inherently slippery. Do you want to take it back?
Philosophically? Because that's kind of where I was going to go first.
Yeah.
Okay, so on a little mini tangent, through philosophy, lots of people understand this idea of peace being the ultimate goal that you're going to have. But throughout history, that's actually been one of the things that philosophers have agreed on the most, is that peace as a goal is dangerous, and that peace as a goal causes the most conflict. And it's interesting because we're talking about, like, from Hobbes to Machiavelli. Philosophers have agreed on this idea, and it's not every day that you see Hobbes and Machiavelli, rocking out the same ideas. They're not generally on the same side of things. And so I was just going to give you a few different perspectives from philosophers on why peace isn't something that we should be looking for. So you have Thucydides, that peace without power leads to conquest. And so this is a philosophical idea that if you have peace in a place, but no power accompanying that peace, and it's just people living in a peaceful kingdom, that a moment that one person no longer wants to live in that type of a kingdom, boom, it's done. Yeah. Right? You have shattered all of the essence of who you are. Machiavelli says that a leader has to prioritize control over peace, because peace as a goal means that everybody will have a different idea of what it means to live peacefully. And unless you have an overarching power to go along with that, then people are going to take advantage of the peace again. But one of my very favorite ones is peace without preparation invites war. That if you aren't prepared to protect your peace, then you are at the whim of everyone else because you've created a vacuum for those who don't put peace as a priority. And you've basically said, hey, are you interested in having this? And then they're like, I am, thank you.
I think you can absolutely see that in Elbaph already with if King Harold is saying, yeah, we are going to be peaceful. Let's say you don't have Shanks protecting. Let's say you don't have Dory and Brogy coming back. Who is providing peace to Elbaph? Is it just the natural strength of the giants? Well, there are a lot of people stronger than giants. How is peace being preserved and protected if peace is the goal?
Lots of people would say that the real goal should be justice, that the ability to have a justice system that works strongly so that you can keep coming back to it to ask whether or not people are getting the justice they deserve. And I think when people hear the justice they deserve, they always think about it negatively. Whereas in philosophy, we would talk about justice as being a positive thing, that getting the justice you deserve might also be getting the reward for your good efforts. It might mean getting recognized for saving others, etc. Right? But the idea of striving for justice rather than striving for peace.
I really like that especially. You might have heard this quote before. It's not a quote people think about a lot with this figure because Martin Luther King Jr. is mostly today praised as, yeah, he's the peaceful protest guy. And that's a whitewashing historically his opinions. A lot of Martin Luther King Jr.'s philosophies are kind of washed over because he's become an embodiment of something we're about to talk about, which is the upholding of peaceful protest. True peace is not merely the absence of tension, it is the presence of justice. And I think that's going to be a huge theme. And as we've already seen with Fishman Island, Oda is very clearly aware of the philosophies and the writings of Martin Luther King Jr., and it comes up in how he writes his pieces. If you read Fishman Island, it is full of MLK inspiration, right? And this is an arc where one of the other themes that we've seen already, this doesn't count as a prediction, we're not going to talk about it a lot here because it's already obvious, is the idea of dreams and specifically dreams of children. And that comes up so often through the writings of Martin Luther King Jr. that I cannot imagine that these are unrelated. I'm going to say a word that is not a slur but makes people a little uncomfortable, and I'm quoting Martin Luther King Jr. just so people have a heads up. Martin Luther King Jr. called for a transition from an obnoxious negative peace in which the Negro passively accepted his unjust plight to a substantive and positive peace in which all men will respect the dignity and worth of human personality. That to me is such a statement against peace as objective.
Yeah. So I think that people also, when you're looking at what's going on right now and how reluctant some people are to get into the fray and the fight of it, and how everybody is being so precious with their actions. And the people who are being precious with their actions are often the politicians and the people in power. Meanwhile, there is a large populace of people. They try to hide it from everyone. The world doesn't see it. It takes a lot of effort to find it. But there's a lot of people who are actively, peacefully protesting, which is super important in the world of peace. Actively, peacefully protesting, etc. You'll see that their reluctance mirrors the problem of peace. Over the last however while, you have seen people treat peace like a precious object not to be disturbed, even prior to that, to the point that places will overly stay separate of giant issues that are taking away people's humanitarian rights because they don't want to quote unquote disturb the peace or the rights of the nations that they are working with. Do not disturb or ask for equity for the sake of peace means that you're actually creating levels of inequity for humans. We are afraid to say anything about it for the sake of peace.
I want to talk now about something that was mentioned here, peaceful protest, because this is one of the core themes we wanted to touch on before getting into this, which is why is it, do you think, in the modern world, as we've progressed, liberal democracies of our world have prioritized so desperately the protection, until very recently, of peaceful protests? Peaceful protests are damaging to the economy. They disturb things, they ruin public order, they make people upset, they raise tensions. Why are these protected? They are inherently negative to the society, right? In theory. Well, there's a really good reason for that, and I don't think a lot of people are going to like this. We are not different humans. Humans are not fundamentally different from the way we used to be. And what that means is, if humans are denied a non-violent method of recourse for injustice, there will always inevitably be violent recourse for injustice. Even in the modern world, as civilized as we think we are, if peaceful protests were not protected, there would be riots to injustice. That would happen. It is not because of kindness and ethics and human rights that modern governments choose to protect and preserve peaceful protest. It is because they are a less destructive way of informing a government that the potential for violence still lingers.
Governments generally, up until a point that they think that they can fully control the populace, and if their goal is to control the populace, it becomes different. They recognize that peaceful protests only cost and disrupt economies in the short term.
Yes.
It's like putting money into education. Putting more money into education disrupts your economy in the short term. But in the long term, you have more educated people who have higher paying jobs, who have more freedom of choice, less sickness, less burden on healthcare, etc. It's the same thing with peaceful protests, that in the short term, they are a disruptor. In the long term, they look at bigger problems, they fix areas of concern, they create more equity amongst the population, and they keep a country unified, which means that it stands in a better position globally.
And something to note here, almost exclusively when actual change starts to occur is when peaceful protests reach a point of boiling anger from being ignored, that they start to become riots. And then history will write, yeah, the peaceful protests were so peaceful that the government said, we respect you and we're going to do it. Because, of course, a government benefits from telling you not to be violent. And that makes sense. They are order. They are the system. Violence against the system is obviously something that is going to be pushed against. But if you look historically, the civil rights movement as peaceful protests was incredibly important for getting people on side. But it wasn't until riots and violence started to come of these protests being quelled and ignored that there was actual change. Because protests have only ever been effective as a reminder that violence still lingers, that it is still a possibility.
This is a common political thought, but it's a political thought that my first poli-sci teacher would talk about it all the time in university, that power only comes through permission. And he would say that over and over again as a reminder that the government only has power because we give it permission to have power, that the government only has power over us and our actions if we fully submit. I think it's really important to, for the sake of this philosophical idea, that this is a reminder to government that they have been given permission to have power and that permission can be taken back.
Exactly. You have been allotted permission to govern and rule, and we can take that permission away. And that makes sense because humans are an inherently hierarchical animal. And I think it is so important to keep in mind exactly what you're talking about, that power is a permission that can be rescinded. And I genuinely think that's something we see through One Piece so goddamn often. How often do we see a leader who loses their authority because the people of the kingdom are no longer willing to submit and accept the governance they've been given?
Exactly. So that brings me to Socrates before we move into the next part.
Okay.
So everyone hears the story of Socrates and understands that he chose to die, that he was arrested for his thinking, for disturbing the peace is basically what he was arrested for. It was said that his ideas were creating in people too much distrust, questioning, etc., etc. His ideas were the idea that you can't prioritize peace above everything else, because if you prioritize peace, that means you're going to tolerate oppression, injustice, and tyranny rather than resisting it because you prioritized peace as your goal. And then peace is maintained at the cost of justice, then breeds resentment and fear and revolt. So Socrates had this discussion of justice in a well-ordered state, and now you had to live with the justice of a state because it's the justice that you keep changing and talking about and questioning, which is why he chose to die. And he said, I will live with the justice of my country, because he decided rather than questioning it, he was going to make the populace question the justice by dying of that justice.
This is a great transition into why specifically peace as not a good goal is going to be the theme of Elbaph. Peace doesn't work as a goal, only as a good outcome. Peace isn't bad, but it's bad as your objective. And this is for a simple fact. In all of these cases we brought up, there is something in common, and that is that within oppressive systems, peace is oppression. Peace is to side with the oppressor. If you are in a system that is already subjugating a group and your goal is peace, then your goal is to subjugate that group, to remove their rights and to keep them down. That is the common thread through all of this.
Yeah, 100%, which is so cool because you said it in a inflammatory way, what then Luffy would be, and we had a whole conversation about what we actually see him as.
Yes, and I think more and more the theme of One Piece continues to be that what something is, what word fits it, depends on your perspective. And we're going to talk about that more and more. But yeah, the classic is Luffy a freedom fighter or a terrorist conversation that comes up, where my argument is genuinely, it just depends who's talking. Us, the readers, are always going to see him as a freedom fighter because we see that he's doing good. But of course, the people who are harmed by him are going to see him as a terrorist because it is a word that doesn't actually reflect what you do any differently. The words only reflect whether or not you see those actions as just or not. But that's not the core of this. The core of this is about oppression.
No, but the core of it is built on that.
Sure. Okay.
Okay, so I was thinking of peace as a goal.
Yes.
And I thought about the 20 kingdoms at the center of our conversation in One Piece at all time.
Yeah.
And it becomes clear that they wanted peace above justice.
Mm-hmm.
And because of that, they were willing to put up with the tyranny, with the injustice, and they allowed the world to become what it was because they just wanted peace so badly.
So we have a world in One Piece via the Celestial Dragons, where if peace is maintained, if that is the goal you have, is a lack of violence, you are effectively siding with the Celestial Dragons. You are siding with those who currently have power over the world and the freedom to do anything. Here is my evidence that this is why this will be the theme of Elbaph. Who is our point of view character? Our introduction, our guy, the guy on the inside is Haruden. Haruden is someone who wants to be a warrior when he has been told not to. Colin is also an introduction, yes, who also wants to be a warrior, even though that isn't accepted. Both seek to be a warrior despite the fact that war is over. We have moved to peace and trade and negotiations. Now, why is it that they can see the need for violence, but the others can't? Well, because the others are held in a sustained peace, protected by Shanks, and they feel they are in a situation where they can exist safely. So peace suits them because they are still in a position of power. Elbaph is oppressed. They are a second-class citizen. The world government does not invite them to the table. They are trading at a deficit because the Navy are who handles trade in the world, but the people of Elbaph overall are still safe. However, it is an oppressive society even though it is oppressed. Other ethnic groups of giants and humans are seen as lesser. Colin and Haruden are oppressed ethnicities in this country. And because of that, they can recognize oppression. Because of that, they can recognize that the status quo of peace is not a fair peace. It is not equitable. The lesson we are genuinely going to see is this insistence on peace being the goal is to accept oppression. We can see this in a lot of ways. King Harald, maybe he was good intentioned, maybe he was afraid of the world government and he just bowed, but he was allowing the world government to raise assassins with Mother Caramel on his island. He was allowing the world government to dictate their trade. We're trying to become part of the world at large, so we will exist by trade. Well, that's who's going to be in charge. I don't know if King Harald is going to have been bullied, if he's going to be misguided, or if he's going to be straight up evil. I genuinely lean towards evil, and he was getting a deal on the side. He was somehow benefiting from this and keeping people down. I'm not certain about that, but it is what my leaning is, because I think this is going to be about the fact that, yeah, you are oppressing the giants by holding them back and keeping them in the situation they're in.
Up until this point, we've been given signs of peace pressed against people who are fighting for themselves, and we don't see that as fighting. When it is mirrored to us, it's the same way when we talk about Luffy being a terrorist and it upsets people. We have been given opportunities to see people fighting back not as war, but as fighting for their own peace and their own freedom. And so people don't think about that as war. But I just want to put something out there to highlight what you're talking about that I also think transitions into our next topic. Every kingdom that Luffy has visited, every one of them where he causes his problems was already in a state of peace.
Only exception I can think of is Alabasta, and otherwise, yes.
Alabasta, I would say, yes, was in a state of war that came from peace. We were shown that immediately. Like immediately, we were shown what happens when you get so caught up in peace that somebody else is able to come into your area, take it over.
Arlong Park was at peace also. There was no revolution. People paid their taxes. Every once in a while, if you didn't pay tax, the government had government punishment, which Arlong was the government. But that was peace. That was Arlong's peace.
It's oppression, but it's peace.
Just because the populace craved revolution doesn't mean that it wasn't at peace, according to those who govern. Luffy doesn't bring violence or peace. He goes in like a fool, makes people confront invisible violence they are used to. First of all, I agree with the second part, that he makes people confront the invisible violence. And yes, absolutely, the idea that the violence of the state is not violence, that what the state does to you, what the government does to you is not violence, is a core theme. But I do think Luffy kind of objectively does bring violence. He brings what the state would define as violence at the very least. And I think philosophically, we can disagree and say, well, yeah, but he's actually just confronting the invisible violence that was already there. But he is doing so with incredibly visible violence. Like, dramatically visible violence. Think about how often Luffy has punched someone through the capital of a country. There's twice I can think of offhand, 3 times Wano. It was near the capital, at least. He is constantly exposing invisible violence to incredibly visible violence.
But Luffy is never fighting for peace.
No.
Luffy is fighting for freedom.
Yeah.
And freedom only comes with justice.
I actually want to disagree with you. I understand. However, Luffy does change the governing structures of the countries he's in because, straight up, this is a thing I believe, and I think Luffy believes it too. Conceptually, Luffy doesn't have political beliefs in terms of won't write a thesis about them, but it's how he acts. The way that he changes them is by putting someone in charge that the people have given their consent to follow. That is the change that Luffy applies to a country. The people of Wano consent to being ruled by Momonosuke. The people of Dressrosa consent to King Riku taking the throne again. Sure, he doesn't change the governing structure, but he does result in consenting leadership, which is a core tenet of a lot of political philosophy. That leadership that is consenting is preferred. A lot of people theorize that the only reason democracies are better than monarchies on average is because there is an implicit consent. There is an implicit abiding by the structure, not just in terms of, oh, because I voted. No. Voting is actually not the be all and end all of democracy. The fact that you vote at all means you are condoning this method of choosing a leader. The reason fascism is what it is because it is no longer a consenting system. By removing the ability to freely participate in the vote and restricting votes to the point that it isn't a meaningful structure, the symbolic power of the vote, the symbolic consent you give to the process, the symbolic consent you give to say, no matter who wins, I have accepted that outcome, that is the real governing power of democracy, is lost through fascism. And I think that is explicitly why Luffy is changing the governing of where he goes, because he leaves a place with consenting leadership.
Something else to consider is even the people who created democracy always said the voting is just step one in a proper democracy, that holding the people accountable for whom you elected and gave permission is step two.
Yes.
And in societies as large as the ones that we have currently, the methodology of that holding accountable comes at peaceful protest. It is only when large groups of us come together to protest that we're able to have a voice heard, which is why protest is an act of balance, but it's also an act of democracy.
I think it's interesting interesting to point out because someone brought up how Dressrosa had a gaslighting piece, and that's true. And I think that ties into what I'm talking about consenting governance, because in theory, people consented to Dressrosa, but philosophically, they couldn't consent to it because they didn't have the information. If your people are being secret policed away into toys and you don't know that,
There isn't consent.
you aren't actually giving informed consent to your leadership, even if you're in theory consenting.
And showing all the different ways in which government and ruling powers can take over. You might not know who's actually in control. The world is really being controlled by 5 great nations, da 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 da. I also would like to argue that Alabasta was also at peace. They fell out of
There was a civil war happening. I'm disagreeing, but I will
No.
hear you out.
Hear me out.
I'm hearing you out.
Remember when we first got there, the country didn't know that number 1, Crocodile the rock star, was bad. And
Yep.
they were still supporting him. There was not a civil war on that ground until Luffy showed up with Vivi.
That is true.
That up until that moment, it was a peaceful place that people thought Crocodile
Yeah.
was the bomb.com.
There was about to be a civil war, but it was probably without Luffy's intervention revealing what Crocodile had been doing. It was probably going to be a pretty swift civil war where there was just a coup of the king.
So I would like to reiterate that every place that Luffy showed up was in a quote-unquote state of peace.
I think that's true. By technicality, yes, every place there's one place that wasn't at peace when he showed up. Orangetown.
That is a pirate moment on the other
That's
side.
a pirate moment. That's not the governing, but
That's
like
not a governing body.
that is a weird exception, but it's so early that it's understandable that Oda wasn't in his cooking yet.
Also, I think that's really important because the pirate thing is supposed to be seen different throughout here because it brings a type of chaos that's taking advantage of a world at peace.
So Skypiea is interesting because it in theory wasn't completely at peace, but it kind of was. There was the skirmishing revolutionary forces of a people who had been oppressed, held back, whose sacred land had been taken, and who were trying to, with extreme violence, even to civilians, get it back. However, they were more or less kept completely at bay by the military power of Eneru, the god of Skypiea. Now, he had overthrown it and taken over, and the peace was only held by the oppressive strength he held, but it was peace.
There was still peace.
It was segregationist.
Nobody was fighting together.
Yeah.
It isn't a world without peace until people are actively fighting against each other, and nobody was actively fighting against each other in Skypiea.
Yeah. The Shandians were trying.
The Shandians had been fighting since day 1. They had been held back and held aside and treated as not even real people.
Yeah.
And so until all the fractions are fighting, then that's still quote-unquote peace.
To highlight that point in a way that I think is really important, Luffy didn't visit the Shandians in their camps where they had been segregated to. He only visited Skypiea. The wars, there were skirmishes, but the war never reached the Skypians who had taken the sacred land of the Shandians. It only reached the borders of their camps. So yeah, Luffy did bring violence to the place he went because he didn't go to the Shandians village. I'm gonna just straight up say everything before Arlong Park fits this a little bit less well. Earlier on, Oda's goals were different, and I think his writing style was different because I've been thinking a lot about the East Blue
He
arcs.
also says that he considers the story to start once he has Zoro, Luffy, Usopp, and Nami together. He said in the colored book I have, that's when he considers his story starting.
Okay, so everything before that, he kind of sees as prologue, which makes sense because Arlong Park is the first place that this kind of applies to. I mean, granted, it actually does also apply to, I forget the name of it, Shelltown. It was funded entirely by the people. Interesting. So it didn't have the world government. I didn't realize that. Drum Island, someone pointed out, and that's an interesting one because they had already done their revolution. So, well, not really. Blackbeard just chased Wapol away and he got scared, but they had started to self-govern and realized they didn't need Wapol, and Luffy helped them maintain their self-governance they'd had. He helped them continue to be a consenting governance, which is, I think, really important.
Moving on from that,
I think that's where we just say the explicit thing you were trying to say earlier, which is because of this, Luffy is war. The entire arc of Elbaph, we're having this dilemma brought up of, is the sun god a war god or a god of freedom and liberation? And I'm here to tell you that whether liberation is war or liberation entirely depends on your perspective. It is the exact same as the terrorist discussion. War and freedom, one and the same. If you are an oppressed person, if you are held down by the system, your rights are taken, then you see this as liberatory. You see this as liberation. If you are on the side of the oppressor, then it is war. It is terror. It is unnecessary bloodshed and violence. If you are Doflamingo, Luffy brought war. He broke your cities. He destroyed your men. He crushed their bones. He created an uprising of your peasant class. If you are the toys, Luffy brought liberation. He saw oppression and fought for your freedoms and rights. If you are Kaido, Luffy brought war. And you like that because you're Kaido. You think war is awesome. And it made your house party a lot better. And you're like, having a great night, kid. Thanks. But you still see it as war. If you are Big Mom, you see what he did as an act of war. He snuck into your land, stole your shit. If you are Caesar Clown, if you are, well, not Crocodile, because you were also bringing war. I guess you both brought war. If he's Crocodile, he brought war to the war fight. That one's a little weird. If you're Wapple, he brought war. Luffy brings war.
I said something else, but similar but different.
Yes.
I see Luffy as being a catalyst. I see Luffy is the spark, but he is not peace. He is not just for freedom. I think Luffy is the thing that will ignite whatever the rumblings are, whatever peaceful protest was not allowed, whatever animosity, fear, holding down has happened. Luffy is the spark that ignites. And so does he ignite war a lot? Yeah. He also ignites personal freedom, sticking up for oneself, etc. I think saying that Luffy is a war god is more accurate than saying he's a god of peace. I would agree. But I would also say that Luffy is the spark of freedom. And the spark of freedom often comes with war.
Yes, I fully agree. We wouldn't see it as war, and that's just because we're on Luffy's side. But if you're not, you do.
Oh, thank you, Monomon. I was going to go there later. Spark, do you mean a flame or a sun? You bet I do.
Oh yeah, ringing the bell in Marineford is absolutely a declaration of war. So is shooting the flag
100%.
of the world government. Those are both
100%.
declarations of war from war god Luffy.
I think that Luffy, in his need to be the spark of liberation, the sun god, the thing that brings the light to the world, that light often comes in the form of war. So sometimes it's just blatant war. Sometimes it is a fighting within the crew and a revealing of a history with Robin, like when we were on Long Ring Longland. And the miniature fight in the Davy bag. It looks different everywhere he goes, but he is always the spark. He is always ignited.
Now, I think there's two characters who are so interesting to this. Kaido and Loki. Okay, I mean, I can do that, sure. You know what? Fuck it. I'll delete my art. Yeah, people for a long time were like, how could Kaido think that he was Joy Boy, a figure of liberation and freedom? Well, Joy Boy was also supposed to be the god of war. He was also supposed to be war itself.
Exactly.
My thinking is that Kaido and Loki are similar in a sense. They're similar in the sense because Joy Boy was a war god and a god of liberation, and there's disagreement. They saw that war would be liberatory, that they would represent war and conquest, and liberation would come from that. And the opposite is meant to be true, that your goal shouldn't be war just because war is necessary for liberation. Your goal should be liberation, and war should be inevitable as the fallout of liberation. That they were attempting the same issue that we are seeing from Harold and the world government, but from the opposite perspective. Peace should come through liberation. War should come through liberation. However, you shouldn't make either war or peace your goal just because liberation, the act of liberating, will cause war, and the result of liberation will cause peace. Just because those are true does not mean that peace and war are good and valid goals. And Luffy is meant to teach this lesson, that liberation is the goal that will inevitably lead to those outcomes.
Even more than that is so many times people don't see what's coming. People choose peace and living a life that's going to have less conflict in it for their children. Okay, I'm going to say a thing people aren't going to like and I'm going to love. Children are a massive issue because they will make you complacent. And by complacent, lots of people think, oh, if you have kids, you're going to fight for what's right. No, you're not. You're going to listen to what people tell you to do because you want the best for your kids and you don't want them to be focused on. You're going to keep the job that you have rather than striving for another one because your kids need health insurance and your health insurance is golden handcuffing you to your job. You're going to not go out and fight for what's right because you can't die because you have to protect your kids. And that's why often you wait too long to fight for peace. What people don't realize is sometimes people fight too late. It is about timing, and sometimes you don't make it. That's one of the other things that Luffy does. He's the one who comes in, even when people have waited too long. He's like a freaking miracle spark. You cannot tell me the people of Dressrosa didn't wait too long, but it was hidden from them.
They didn't know.
They didn't understand
they didn't
what they were waiting for.
The oppression was hidden.
Exactly. It was too late, but Luffy revealed and managed to pull them together. And so Luffy is hopeful. Luffy is the god of liberation and freedom because even when it should be too late, even when we have gone over the line, when people can't fight back because they've allowed their government to hold too much power and sway over their lives, Luffy comes in and ignites what should be dead. And so Luffy in himself becomes this redemption miracle for everyone in this story, where he says, yes, it's gone on for 800 years. Yes, some of you have been oppressed in different ways and things are hidden from you, but I am the ultimate light in the ultimate dark.
I love that. That's such a good phrase. Oh, the clothes should be white. You're right. That is how Nika works.
His clothes should be white. Okay, so bringing it into One Piece again, something that I thought was really, really important is that the world government tells people what? That it maintains the peace.
Yes.
The world government of One Piece, their literal whole fighting thing is that they are justice. They fight for peace. But peace in their hands means absolute total submission to celestial rule. And if anyone attempts to break free, Lelouja, Void Century, Warlord system, if anyone attempts to break free, they bring the death, war, and destruction to them.
Mm-hmm.
They are fighting for peace, but they are fighting for peace through oppression. They literally show you in this that peace is a system that is evil, that fighting for the sake of peace is fighting for the sake of oppression.
Mm-hmm.
And he's been telling us that all along.
It really did take Elbaph for me to realize this, that it took me going, what the fuck? Why are we seeing our point of view characters as warriors in a place that's turned to peace? Because I've been baked in the same propaganda soup as the rest of y'all. I am like, peace is good. We should be peaceful and kind. Peace is good. And I'm going, why is Colin wanting to be a warrior? Why is Harridan wanting to be a warrior? Why are we seeing it as the bad state of the kingdom is that things are chill and peaceful? Well, it's because the king said we'll be peace and trade with other nations. Well, trade in this world is only done by the whims of the world government or the black market. Those are the only two groups that are capable of trading around the world. And if his goal is to become a peaceful trade nation, that means bowing down to the whims of power. That means bowing down to the groups who oppress Elbaph. That is not favorable peace. That is not a good peace. This whole idea of war and liberation being one and the same, of peace and oppression being one and the same, depending on who you are, that is absolutely going to tie into deities. I'm telling you guys that gods and demons are one and the same in One Piece, and that's why the celestial dragons all have demonic powers and yet call themselves gods. It's because there is going to be no distinction between what a god is and what a demon is. I am fully committed to that idea because One Piece has become, in my mind, entirely about the idea that your perspective shapes what a word means. Purple sash. Well, does it have to be? Okay. Well, if it has to be.
So one of the things that I think it's really important to say, we should know, but we don't, that sometimes it can be too late. They say in Creating a Fascist Regime that it takes 1 year to fully eradicate a populace's ability to fight back. Once you regulate people's movement and their voice, etc., it becomes really easy to keep them oppressed. And it would require a larger thing outside to push that. When I think about that in One Piece, about how the celestial dragons sit on top of the world, they have an imposed peace, and it ensures obedience, not justice, which you can see all over the world. When it ensures peace is happening for the sake of somebody else, to line their pockets, to give them more power, to keep them laying down. You can see this because peace under the celestial dragons is oppression across the world, and the government and the army enforces it. We were looking at this and we realized that they call it stability. They say it over and over again. The world government is the name of stability. And we will keep everything stable for you so you continue to watch your great things on TV. You can be the person in the great little movie about the letter that you wanted to send to Nami who has hopes and dreams. All of that continue to go as long as you 100% give the celestial dragons all of your extra money, time, energy belongs to them. And the world government will fight to make sure that continues. You live in quote unquote peace. He created the most sneaky character in the entire world who looks like he is just faffing through this entire planet, not with a care in his mind, with emptiness beside his head, and his ultimate form is laughter. And yet what he is actually doing is highlighting the oppression within the quote unquote peace. And so then you go back to the idea of one piece and you wonder if there's two ways of saying that word. If he is talking about a one piece across the world where he is revealing the fakeness of the peace and bringing freedom, and freedom is actual peace, to protest the things that upset you, that hurt others, and one piece in that we are all united in our thinking and understanding that we all deserve to have our individual lives, worries. We all deserve to say when something isn't right and not be manipulated, controlled, turned into giants, have our children taken, that all of these things are examples of not having true freedom, and a lack of freedom is a lack of peace. And so Luffy is such a well-hidden character that he hides him behind the thing that is most important in the world, joy. Because you can't have joy unless you have freedom.
I love that. I love that. I love that. We've tackled the hidden theme of Elbaph that hasn't been spoken to us yet. That is just being hinted at. What we haven't done is talk about the obvious theme, because that's not a prediction. But I want to see, can we figure out the best way of tying the theme of imagination and children's beliefs in with this idea of peace as oppression? Very obviously, a child's imagination, what people believe in, what they fear. These are themes of Elbaph too that we're being kind of bludgeoned with right now. Like they're being put more forward.
You know what I keep thinking about on the first level, just on level one of this child thing, as a person who works with the child? Something that is really interesting about children is that they are often able to articulate easily when something isn't fair. Fairness is their universe. And as adults, we grow up realizing sometimes shit won't be fair. So we got to work on a greater good thing, right? I started to think about how children are kind of an ultimate litmus test of truth and fairness. And that a child's dreams could be to be anything they want. I want to be a fireman. I want to be a cop. I want to be a soldier or a ballerina. They're the ones who can notice thing. This thing that they're doing is super unfair. They're hurting this person. This shouldn't happen. You shouldn't get to do these things and then have this person be upset. And it's really interesting that he chose children in this way, because the children are people who aren't going to be easily suppressed in the same way. Like oftentimes it was really difficult to teach children, especially the smaller they are, to hide. If you were hiding in any war, when we've had to hide people, which is over and over again, because they didn't understand what it looked like to be suppressed and to have their joy tamped down. And that's the reason why when we want to show depression or hatefulness or the bad things of war, we often show children being subdued like adults. And so I think it's a really interesting thing that he has children being at the top of this, because children are the ultimate expression of joy.
Part of what I would tie in as well is thinking about what all the children fear. Children are kind of a way to show instruction, because children believe what they're told a lot of the time. They haven't had enough experience to do more than reflect what they're told is the way of the world, which to me ties into these are the things they think. These are what they think are the scariest things, because all they know of the world is what they've been told by adults. I don't know. It's tough, right?
I agree. There's a whole bunch of things about children that are supposed to also be represented in Luffy, because Luffy is this version of not growing up in believing that we watch him change as a leader 100%. We've talked about that over and over again. But he still has this ability to be so young and so focused on fairness and so focused on right and wrong and joy.
Something interesting that kind of ties into, I'm realizing, Luffy's dream that we don't know might come up this arc. His dream is something he's had since he was a child, right? It's a childlike dream, and it's the same as Roger's.
It's going to be something about a big party thing.
But is there a chance it'll tie into the other theme, the theme of peace not necessarily being, or maybe his goal would be world peace, like, and that's the contradiction, and that's the idea of like peace being obtained through violence.
People would laugh at a dream of
No,
world
people
peace,
wouldn't laugh at it. That's the issue. I think his dream might be revealed
That's
this
what I
arc,
was
though, thinking about the idea that children's dreams are such a part of it. Oh, this is so tough.
Yes, and this was his childhood dream.
Yeah. Oh, man.
I agree. I had the same thought. I was like, children's dreams. Well, what about Luffy's dream?
Yep.
I think part of it would be uniting the whole world in something, which is going to mean the getting rid of the red line. And the red line is a symbol of that hatred and power. So I think that's really important. It's more than symbolic, but it is a symbol.
I think we can move on.
Before we go into our third world, which is going to tie into this. Because of all the work we did here this week, boom.
So the next thing we were looking at is those who seek peace without strength will be ruled by those who do not care about peace. I think this is essential to a ton of it. I think this is going to be incredibly relevant. And I think we see it constantly, the need for strength. And I genuinely think it's going to be a problem for Elbaph that they have allowed themselves to lose their warrior culture, that they have allowed themselves to hunker under the protection of others, that I think Loki is going to be a necessary figure. And that's why he's saying, hey, I need my strength back. If you want to save Elbaph, uncuff me. I genuinely believe he's not saying, I'll destroy Elbaph if you don't uncuff me. I genuinely think he is saying, I can't save Elbaph if you don't uncuff me. I just think also he's too much of a bastard to phrase it that way, because I think he doesn't want to be seen that way. I think he got image problems.
I think beyond image problems as well is there are wartime leaders and there are peacetime leaders. If you don't have problems with your leadership, then you're a cult member.
Honestly, yeah. There should be no one you aren't capable of criticizing. If you can't criticize them, either you're in a cult or somehow your leadership has the exact same political sensibilities as you, the individual, and that's insane.
So I think it's really important to remember that you need to be able to have these discourses, and that's what we're talking about. When we talk about One Piece, we're talking about this type of discourse. And this type of discourse is what's missing in One Piece's world, and it's why we believe that peace shouldn't be the goal, because peace is just covering up the lack of ability to have political conversations, to disagree, to have your opinions. So I think that's what he's showing us. These conversations don't exist in One Piece for a reason. It's not just because they're boring to people who are reading a manga.
The last thing we wanted to talk about, what we think the final battle is going to look like, because we want to talk about the fact that it's not a battle for peace.
No, I think it's a battle that's supposed to bring us back into alignment, to give freedom and power back to some people who had freedom and power prior to the invasion.
Prior to Marie-Joie being taken over.
I have new theories on that.
Do I think Blackbeard or Emu will be the final villain? I got a cop-out answer.
Oh, gross.
Well, I think Emu and Blackbeard are supposed to be one and the same, just the same figure, the same motivations on a different cycle. That they, but come on, do you think I'm wrong? Do you think I'm wrong?
Maybe.
Okay, well, good for you. I do think because of that, I kind of think it's going to be Blackbeard, because I think he's going to be able to step in at the defeat of Emu. But yeah, I think it'll be sort of both of them, sort of probably Blackbeard at the last minute, because that's the deal. That's the guy. That's the man.
I think Emu is going to be our final boss. I think Blackbeard is going to show up before then, and we're going to have some very Blackbeardian moments. I even think Blackbeard is going to destroy himself.
I could see it, because I look at the mural and I see it being that Emu was like, hey, Joy Boy, I'll help you defeat the people who rule the world. And then Emu betrayed that mission and took over. I think Blackbeard is going to help us beat Emu.
I think maybe, but I think he's going to do it at the ultimate destruction of himself.
Interesting. We'll have to see.
I feel like I've got a pulse on this in a weird way that I can't explain, but I feel like we're gonna sing Bye Bye Blackbeard.
Okay. I think because of the legend of how Blackbeard died, he is going to be our first canonical drowning of a devil fruit user, especially because he's put all of his eggs in the devil fruit basket.
I really like it when you say all of his eggs in a devil fruit basket. I'm not gonna lie to you.
I mean, that's his whole deal. He's like, I got all the fruits.
Also, we're gonna have to have that whole problem with Blackbeard. Like, what the shit is up with him? Why is he able to have more than one fruit? That shit's gonna have to like really come out, which I think is gonna help us in the destruction of Blackbeard moment. I think that Luffy is hoping that by returning the world to balance, that the world will find a new type of peace that is natural, because he understands that peace happens as a consequence of people being truly free.
That Luffy sees the invisible violence of oppression, that he, unlike most people, doesn't see the justification of, well, it's the system doing it, so it's okay. So he is out here ending the invisible violence, bringing it forwards, and physically punching it. That he's a force of seeking a true justice and fighting the invisible violences. He's fighting the lack of peace that is somehow allowed and called peace. And yeah, I think I agree that his goal, his ending, is liberating the world, is creating a true and lasting peace through justice, a real peace. This is from the second paragraph of the preface of Ways of Peace. We should not blindly prefer peace at any price, especially if it is the kind of peace which may require us to accept injustice and oppression in order to avoid conflict and violence. But there are many kinds of peace besides this sort, which people suffer when they have been pacified. We can conceive of peace in many different ways, and these differences are related to a variety of assumptions and practices we adopt in our culture. That, to me, feels so in line with the philosophy of One Piece, that the way to arrive at this greater peace is to actually confront the ways we're framing the world, the ways we're seeing things. And I think this is only going to feel more and more appropriate to the series as we go.
I'm going to thank the squishies. Thank you, squishies.
We need to thank the Patreon. Yeah, we need to thank the squishies.
Yeah, like what do you think I'm doing right now? I'm ignoring you.
God, you're so right. You do it.
Well, first I want to thank our whole crew: Dark Okira, Draco Meme, Dr. Jack, Big Honkin' Squishies of Honkin' Awesomeness. Check out the Patreon. We have new chapter read and reacts and exclusive chats just for Patreons. You pick a number between 1 and 23 so we can...
I'm going to say 19.
Okay, well, I don't know who that is.
What?
I don't have that here. You
have looking at the list.
It is.
Oh, I thought you had the list. I wasn't finding the list because you were doing it.
Yeah, I don't know what to tell you.
All right, I found it. I've 19. Thank you, Traynix. You are today's special squishy. Traynix.
Traynix?
Traynix. Traynix.
Traynix.
All right, you ready to do a plug?
I will do the plug. Hey, YouTube, plug.
What?
You heard me.
Join the Patreon, subscribe, ring the bell, please comment. Genuinely, I'm really proud of the conversation we had. I hope you loved it. And if you did, send it to someone. I want people's thoughts. This is a controversial video. A lot of people are going to disagree. And what's great about all you people disagreeing with us is that in a few months, you're going to see that we're right, motherfucker.
100% correct.
And I love that for us. I want to briefly say something here that's a response to chat. And I need to make it clear that I am very much a believer that Twitch's terms of service are really good and based and actually cool. So what I am saying applies only to strictly the most peaceful protest possible, being a good and orderly citizen who obeys every law because law is inherently ethical. I fully believe what I am saying. Where someone said, God, I wish Luffy was real, and I need to tell you something. Luffy is real. Luffy might be you, and he might not be. But Luffy only succeeds in what he does, and it can only take on what he does because of what I said earlier. Because he has the will of the people. Because he is creating consenting governance, consenting leadership that at no point is giving up the best option. The most oppressive governments in the world would easily, and I mean literally incredibly easily, overthrown by their populace. Every country in the world has to bow to the will of the masses. If you are ever thinking about giving up, don't let that spark of believing in a better world feed you, and do everything you can. Because if the option is to give up on living the life you want anyways, why would you not do every peaceful option you possibly can take to preserve the society you want to live in, to protect the culture you care about and your home?
Or create. Because remember, peace under oppression is stagnation.
If you enjoyed the video, please catch the next one. And until next time,
Squish on squishies.
it's been lovely talking to you.